Uh, we are now recording. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Sam Sugar again. Today, we are recording an interview with Hillary Hogue, who is a victim of the guardianship racket. She lives in Naples, Florida, which is in Collier County. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to Hillary, who has been a vocal advocate. She's appeared in front of some politicians to let them know how they're failing us. So let me start, Hillary, by asking you, when did all of this stuff start?
It started November of 2017, just a little bit over a year ago. Briefly, I had been taking care of my 87-year-old father since I moved down from New York. I would go and do an 8-hour round trip to visit him, take him to the doctors, make sure he had enough food in his refrigerator. He was living with his girlfriend, but she was getting older, so it was always known the last stop on the train, so to speak, would be with my young boys and I. And no sooner than 2 weeks had he been living with us that my sister came into my home and stole his briefcase with his financials, and a week later she retained an elder attorney, and the rest is history.
And so, like so many of these cases, there's an issue of family dysfunction. Nearly all of these cases involve siblings who don't get along. So that's how it started. How quickly did this process move along once it began?
Quite quickly. We were blindsided. My sister came over and pushed my father into going to her home for a day. I encouraged the visit, thinking it would give me a rest from my job as caregiver. And needless to say, she kidnapped my father for over 2 weeks. And it's the same modus operandi. I couldn't speak to him on the phone. I called the local law enforcement, and they would not go into my sister's gated community to make sure he was okay. And it was a whirlwind. It was a nightmare.
Did it start with an ETG, with an emergency
Of
temporary?
course.
Okay.
Well, doctor, yes, you and I know the emergency temporary guardian, it's ex parte, nothing, and I mean nothing is substantiated. It's built on lies, and everything is just pushed through.
Were you at least notified of these ex parte meetings, which of course is completely illegal? But,
no, I was not.
So this judge, like so many others, simply ignores the requirement that their jurisdiction to be justified requires due process, which by definition means letting people know that there's an issue at a hearing. Mm-hmm. So this is such a typical story. What happened next?
Well, my father had no idea what was going on. 4 days later, the ETG called me. I met her the following day at Starbucks, poured my heart out to her, not realizing my father was being charged by the hour for me speaking to her. My dad was left with $1 in his pocket. This from a man who was worth, he was doing quite well financially, and I had to retain an attorney. I thought I had the best attorney in Collier, only to find out that her husband was to be arrested for soliciting a prostitute. It is the definition of corruption, and when you're in it, you feel that there is no way out, and for most people, unfortunately, that is the case.
And that husband who was arrested for prostitution is a judge, is he not? Yes,
he was the head judge for the 20th Circuit of the Middle District of Florida, which it covers 5 counties, and this was my lawyer's husband. So it couldn't have gotten any worse.
So this is back in 2017. We're at the end of 2018. Tell me what's happened to you and your family as a result of all of this.
We've been changed forever. Our lives will never be the same. My father is very reluctant to leave the house, even though I managed miraculously to get him out of the guardianship situation. by signing a bogus settlement agreement. But I say always, I would have cut my arms and legs off to keep him from being adjudicated and being given a professional guardian that would have bled him dry. So it's changed us forever. We will never be the same. He's out of just now about 150,000, but more importantly, he's out of his self-worth. And in the end, I do know, I'm not a religious person, but I can honestly tell you, at the time I didn't realize it, but now I know that we were put through this nightmare for a reason, because I have become a vocal part of the predatory guardianship reform. And
Good.
so here we are, and everything happens for a reason.
How has this impacted your children?
Well, my son Aiden, he was 8 at the time, he's 9 now. He has panic attacks when a car pulls into our driveway, which isn't really quite often, but when there is a car that drives up in our driveway, he has panic attacks because he's in fear that the guardian police, as he calls them, will come and try and take his grandfather again.
How is his health? Not Aiden's, but his grandfather's health, your father.
My father's fine. My sister made the accusations that he had advanced dementia, which defined would be he would be incontinent, he would be wearing adult diapers, he would wander, he wouldn't remember my name or my children's name, and that is not the case. My dad is astute. He had a little bit of, yes.
Do you think there was ever any rational reason to think he was incapacitated?
No.
Then why do you think anyone would want him to be judged incapacitated?
Well, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Money. Money, because in the end, doctor, my father and I, and again, we would have signed anything. My father and I, in order to get him out of the nightmare, so to speak, we had to sign a settlement agreement. We were extorted into signing it. And basically, of course, everything was about my dad's health and well-being. The settlement basically said 2 things: that my father would not change his estate planning, and that he wouldn't gift me anything. It was all about money, period, the end.
And what can you say about the guardian that was this a professional guardian?
Yes.
How would you describe that situation?
The situation, she seemed to be okay. She was all right. The bill was very high, but one thing that I really think back and reflect, she pushed me not to retain an attorney. She said, if you retain it, she goes, your father will be adjudicated and he will be given a plenary guardianship. He is incapacitated. And if you hire or retain a lawyer, you will not be able to have me as a professional guardian, because the ETG cannot, unless the family members ask, become the plenary guardian when the ward is adjudicated. So she didn't want that to happen, and that to me was a big injustice. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the day my dad was frugal to a fault, except with his family members. Here he's left with $1 in his bank account, and his Morgan Stanley statement comes in, and her name is on it, a complete stranger. And my sister, again, nothing to do with my father, and all of a sudden she turns up out of nowhere, and it's all because of money.
And that's such a common story. It's really tragic. If you could wave a magic wand or snap your fingers, what would you change about this system?
A few things.
Other than everything.
Right, other than everything. One thing that really irks me, I mean, a lot of things do. Of course, we know the POA, the healthcare surrogate, the preneed guardians. I mean, that to me is the biggest joke. But besides that, I would want to do one thing. If there is a question that someone is incapacitated, there should be a full medical done. It is never done in the state of Florida. My dad had hypothyroidism, and now he's taking levothyroxine. No one, not one person from the county said, let's run blood tests to see if maybe there's an underlying condition that can mimic dementia. So that would be one big thing to me.
Well, as an internal medicine specialist, I can certainly go along with that. What would you say about the 3 examiners that were sent out to determine his...
Oh my gosh. I mean, you really opened up Pandora's box, because I can go on forever. I will say one thing. The medical doctor, yes, he is a medical doctor, but his trade was, he's a gynecologist. He took a 4-hour class. The other woman, she was all right in her, all right, she works at a hospice. The third person, I won't mention her name, but she has no credentials. She works in a nursing home. She is not a social worker. She is a social director. So basically, she'll show potential residents around the facility. She'll set up a bingo game or 2, and she works in cahoots with 2 of the big players in Collier, and I will call them out, Patrick Weber and Samuel Pivacek, who was married to a judge, and she petitions the court to find residents of this nursing home incapacitated, and you can bet a few dollars that none of these people that are now wards of the state have any idea that they are, because their appearances are waived and no one knows. So again, it was a complete waste of time. Her catchphrase is on her report, she said, Mr. Hogue presents alert, yet slightly confused. I mean, it's idiotic.
You see, what jumps out at me is the conflict of interest of that individual.
Of course.
Yeah, which of course should disqualify them from being an examiner, but apparently doesn't.
Well, doctor, you as we have called everyone. I've called every entity that I could to complain about this woman and the others, and basically, great, we'll notate that. But you know what? The fight is not over, because we stand proud, because we have done nothing wrong. My father's only crime was growing old, having
in America,
state, and living in the middle district of, Florida, Collier County.
And the shame is that it's not just the middle district of Florida, it's all over Florida. It's all over the country.
Yes.
In hot spots, and Collier happens to be one. Hillary, thank you very much for this interview. And we will post this interview very shortly